Hey folks, welcome back to Aircraft Adventures. Today I'm featuring 5 of my favorite aircraft featured on my channel. Let's go! Today, we explored an aircraft unlike anything you've seen before. Resembling a tiny egg with wings, the Questair Venture's shape is both thought-provoking and yet puzzling. Why was it designed this way? Why is it so short? Can people actually fit in it? And what's up with the landing gear? How do you even land this thing? Wait a minute, this tail looks familiar. Where else have I seen it? All these questions and more are easily revealed once you get to know the true story behind this fascinating design. The Venture saga begins in the late 1970s. Jim Griswold was a talented designer at Piper Aircraft, having previously worked for Cessna and Learjet. At a time when most Piper designs were utilitarian and not exactly exciting, Griswold created the Piper Malibu. The Malibu was unlike anything seen before in general aviation. It was slender, with a long nose, long wings, and sat on a tall landing gear. On other general aviation designs, the passenger was almost an afterthought. In the Malibu, however, the passenger took center stage and enjoyed luxurious accommodations in a pressurized cabin, allowing for long-distance flights with less fatigue. In spite of the downturn of the economy in the 1980s, the Malibu sold pretty well. The Malibu's target market were high net worth individuals and corporations, both with deep pockets who could afford the expenses associated with a 6-passenger aircraft that was both pressurized and turbocharged. And that's when the light bulb went off for Mr. Griswold. What if there was a 2-seater version of the Malibu? It would be infinitely cheaper to buy and operate. This mini Malibu would open up a whole new market for business travelers who needed to travel far, complete their mission, and get back home in time for supper and put the kids to bed. Let's see how Jim accomplished his goals with his mini Malibu design. Along with his Piper colleague Ed McDonough, Jim rounded up a few investors and set up a new company named Questair, settling in Greensboro, North Carolina. Their new aircraft was to be named the Venture. In a bid to get as many Ventures in pilots' hands across America, Jim decided to sell the aircraft as a kit. This would lower acquisition cost, mitigating risk and liability. But most important of all, the Venture wouldn't have to jump through all the hoops required to get the aircraft certified, especially in an era when litigation costs were making certified aircraft almost unattainable. Remember the Malibu that Jim worked on? It's been said the Venture is a Malibu that was hacked into 3 pieces and welded back together as a 2-seater, which is not entirely far from the truth. There are many little reminders of the Malibu's heritage built into the Venture. The wings and tail, for example, are scaled-down versions of the Malibus and use practically the same airfoil. Its long nose houses a Continental IO 550 with no turbocharging. Because of its short stance above the ground, it uses a short prop with very thick blades, allowing it to absorb all the horsepower and maximize thrust. Designed entirely using groundbreaking computer-based technology, also known as CAD/CAM, the Venture was built for maximum efficiency and little weight. At the time, the Questair was competing for market share with 2 other fast home builds, the Lancer and Glasair. Unlike those designs which embraced fiberglass technology, Jim and his team stuck to what they knew best and built the Venture out of traditional aluminum instead. The Venture's rounded fuselage is intricately sculpted and flush riveted, revealing a perfectly smooth skin that rivals any aircraft with a composite fuselage. And this is where we begin to understand why the Venture looks the way it does. For starters, the landing gear on most high-performance aircraft are stowed away inside the wings, which require a thicker wing area and therefore more drag. In order to minimize drag, Jim opted to keep the wings razor thin, so instead the Venture tucks the gears away inside the fuselage, not unlike a Cessna 210 or an F-16 for that matter. Need to slow the Venture down in a hurry? Not a problem, just slow down to 170 knots, drop the landing gear, and watch it come down at 3,000 feet per minute like an anvil. Because the Venture is very small to begin with, the wheels are proportionally tiny as well, making ground operations a bit interesting, but more on that later. What about the Venture's egg shape? How can a plane that's so short even fly? Well, notice how both wings and tail are very long and narrow. This is called a high aspect ratio wing and works perfectly well for high performance missions. The distance between the wing and tail is in perfect harmony, which means it's just as stable as its competitors, or any plane for that matter. Jim Griswold literally did away with as much fuselage as possible, leaving only as much room as necessary for the cockpit and tail surfaces, and thus creating one of the lowest drag designs ever built. It should be noted that a Venture is only 16 feet from nose to tail, making it almost 8 feet shorter than a Cessna 150. So what makes people think the plane is so short is in fact the very wide fuselage coupled with the long wings. Which leads us to the next major Venture selling point. Remember when I mentioned that the Malibu was designed for maximum comfort at long ranges? Well, so was a Venture. The fuselage was an awe-striking 46 inches across, giving the pilot and passenger the same space as the Malibu. Part of this was because the landing gear was tucked away between the pilots, which conveniently added to the feeling of spaciousness to the Venture. So at this point you're thinking, okay, it's spacious and now the design is starting to make sense. But I bet it takes a pilot like Bob Hoover to fly this thing, right? There's no way this plane is safe to fly. And once again, you'd be wrong. The Venture's slender control surfaces were perfectly synchronized with its side controllers, allowing it to fly smoothly at cruise speeds, while giving a good control harmony at low speeds and approach to landing. Hey, wait a minute, there's another famous plane with side sticks. The Cirrus SR-22. It turns out that Jim Griswold went to work for Cirrus years later and developed very similar side controls as used in the Venture. The breakout forces felt on the controls are handled by spring cartridges, which further added to the stability of the Venture. Okay, it's spacious, well balanced, and it flies well. But I bet it lands faster than an F-18, right? Wrong again. The Venture's wings are designed for both high and low speed. Employing wing cuffs at the outer edges of the wing, the Venture stalls at an easy and forgiving 60 knots. In fact, because of the spring cartridges used to handle control surfaces, it is very difficult to stall the Venture, and in most cases the plane will simply mush forward when the stick is pulled back. So now you're probably wondering, how fast is this tiny plane? I'm glad you asked. Let's keep in mind that the original Malibu had a 310 horsepower turbocharged engine. With less than half the size and half the weight, the Questair Venture was powered by a similar engine with 280 horsepower and no turbocharging. With this arrangement, most Ventures will easily cruise at 240 knots, all while sipping only 13 gallons of fuel per hour. To put this in perspective, your average Beechcraft Bonanza will burn about the same amount of fuel, but fly at 160 knots. I know it's an apples to oranges comparison, but still. At wide open throttle, the Venture will easily clock around 270 knots, well past 300 miles an hour. Needless to say, takeoffs are exhilarating, and the Venture launches off runways like a rocket. Cruise climbs are conducted at 150 knots with a climb rate of over 2,000 feet per minute. All this power and so little weight, several Ventures have racked up many time to climb and world speed records for their category. In fact, one Venture flew up to 35,000 feet, beating a record for altitude for a non-turbocharged plane. While not exactly considered an aerobatic aircraft, the Venture is rated for 6 positive Gs and 3 negative, allowing its pilots to have a little fun while cruising along. With its spacious cockpit, the Venture will carry its pilot between 800 and 1,000 nautical miles, depending of course on how fast the pilots want to arrive at their destination. This is exactly what Jim Griswold intended for the tiny plane, and it fulfills this mission with ease. So, did Jim fulfill his dreams of filling the sky in every airport with Ventures? Unfortunately, things didn't quite go as planned. If you recall, the Venture was sold as a complete kit, and even came included with an engine and prop, which was very rare for a kit plane. At the time, the kit sold for about $60,000, which was actually a good price considering it included a brand new Continental IO 550. Jim estimated your average pilot could screw together a Venture in about 2,000 hours. The package was irresistible, and over 100 kits were sold in the early 90s. What new Venture owners didn't realize was the insane amount of time and dedication required to piece the aircraft together. After spending thousands of hours, many Venture kits were sold off in frustration. For those few who made it to the finish line, they had invested around 5,000 hours and up to 10 years in building their aircraft. Many began to realize why it was named the Venture. Unfortunately, the long build time wasn't the only factor in the small Venture fleet size. Recall that tiny landing gear bolted to the bottom of the plane? It was a source of many headaches for new Venture pilots. The tiny nose wheel was commanded with a highly unique system which essentially allowed you to either turn the aircraft or use the brakes, but not both at the same time. So this resulted in several runway excursion incidents, several which totaled the plane and also discouraged many from wanting to own or fly a Venture. Another quirk were the main landing gear oleo struts, which had so much play that when rocked to one side, the Venture would keep leaning until the pilot turned the plane the other way. In an attempt to offer a more user-friendly version, the Questair Spirit was rolled out. This one was powered by Continental with 210 horsepower, but most notable of all were the fixed landing gear. The Spirit did not sell quite as good as the Venture, which made it clear what pilots really wanted. Over the years, Venture owners have made modifications which improved handling and usability, but as a company, Venture never really bounced back, and eventually kits were no longer being produced. However, Questair LLC in Bolton, Mississippi carries parts and supports the current fleet of Ventures. A real shame, as its small group of owners is very passionate about the Venture. The Venture can stall at only 60 knots while cruising at 240 knots, meaning it has an enviable 1 to 4 performance envelope. A few Ventures wound up in the Reno, Nevada air races. A prime example belonged to Mike Dacey. Modified to produce around 700 horsepower, Mike won several races in its category. No doubt that competitors were dumbfounded by the little egg speeding past them at over 400 miles per hour. Between 20 to 30 Ventures and Spirits remain in airworthy condition. As a tight-knit group, Venture owners across the country hang out together for the occasional fly-in. Considering how fast a plane goes and how far it can fly, not a tall order at all. Are you interested in owning a Venture? Kits are no longer available, however Ventures can be found from time to time on the used market. It does take some working knowledge of the aircraft to own and take care of, plus some finesse in piloting, but one thing is for sure, Venture ownership means you fly a plane that's unlike anything else in the sky, and that alone is worth the price of admission, even if it looks like an egg. Mooney aircraft are known for speed and efficiency. Their smooth, laminar flow wing, distinctive tail, and low stance on the ground distinguish Mooneys from other aircraft. It's almost inconceivable to imagine that this sports car of the sky was born from a tiny single-seater. The Mooney Mite provided the foundation for everything Mooney ever built. Let's take a quick glance at the man behind the Mooney Mite and understand his vision behind the design. Al Mooney was born in Denver and cut his teeth as an engineer for several companies in the 1920s. During his time working for others, Al was restless and felt the designs of the day were slow and inefficient, including the ones for the companies he worked for. While working for Alexander Aircraft, he designed the Bullet, one of the first production aircraft with a retractable gear. And while the aircraft was a commercial flop, it set the stage for everything Mooney strived for with his next designs. He then tried to market his own design, the Mooney A1, but the Great Depression hit and it too went nowhere. Mooney was then hired as chief executive for Culver Aircraft and designed the Dart and Cadet two-seaters, which were tiny but fast designs that already bore the Mooney hallmarks: high speed, on minimal power, and a highly efficient airframe. When World War II broke out, all manufacturers directed their production at military aircraft, including Culver. The Cadet was used as the basis for the PQ-14, an optionally manned drone that featured a tricycle landing gear. This aircraft was a direct ancestor to the Mooney Mite, which was to come a few years later. As soon as the war ended, Al Mooney and his brother Arthur formed Mooney Aircraft with the goal of producing an aircraft that would fill every fighter pilot's desires. Fighter-like agility, simple to operate, practical, and most importantly, wouldn't break the bank. Named the M18 Mite, the tiny aircraft checked off all those boxes and then some. One of Al Mooney's visions with the Mite was an aircraft that could be mass-produced and used as a daily transport for those who required long commutes to work. In essence, a plane for the masses. While these visions of mass production weren't exactly fulfilled, the Mite was immediately well received by both new and experienced pilots. The Mite was certainly a sexy aircraft to look at and fun to fly, but the real genius of the Mite lies in the details. Al Mooney's goal was to extract the most performance out of minimal power, and in order to achieve this, the tiny Mite featured laminar flow wings, the same type of wing found on the P-51 Mustang. Laminar flow wings were a novelty in the 1940s. Most manufacturers chose not to use them as they made the aircraft much trickier to handle at low speeds. Knowing that laminar flow wings are not conducive to good handling at slow speeds, Al Mooney incorporated a standard airfoil in the outer section of the wing together with the ailerons, and in the process creating the first hybrid laminar flow wing aircraft in history. To improve performance on the low end of the speed envelope even further, the Mite included flaps as well, all to the benefit of low time and high time pilots. The Mite could now easily fly out of dirt or grass runways, making it very appealing to pilots at small airports. With such a clean wing and streamlined fuselage, they also tended to glide very well, which could spell trouble on an approach, especially on shorter runways. The retractable gears, when extended, doubled as spoilers and helped tame the smooth Mooney Mite on approaches. What really set the Mooney Mite apart was a tail that seemed to point in the opposite direction of all other aircraft. In reality, only the trailing edge is forward swept, lending it the backwards look Mooneys are famous for. So why did Al Mooney design it this way? While there isn't one single definitive answer, the consensus stands that this design added stability, as the forward tilting rudder would be fully upright when at high angles of attack, and thus placing it almost directly into the oncoming airflow. And if that's truly the case, we can tip our hat yet again to the genius of Al Mooney. And yet, another subtle feature lies in this tail. The tail has no trim tabs. Instead, the whole tail pivots while trimming. This is yet another quirky but ingenious design feature that's been carried through every model of Mooney till this day. In fact, Al Mooney built this all-moving tail feature into the Lockheed Jetstar many years later. While small aircraft were not exactly rare in the post-war era, none of them had retractable gear, which made perfect sense. Typically, the mechanisms required for such systems are complex and heavy, relying on hydraulics, pneumatic tubing, plus compressors and actuators. Not so with the Mite. A long lever called the Johnson bar was placed on the floor, and with one strong yank from the pilot, would safely retract all three gears via push rods. It is said that it was easy to tell a first-time Mite pilot, as the aircraft would wag all over the place on climb as the pilot struggled to lift the gear up while flying the aircraft. But practice makes perfect. Many pilots have experienced the dreaded gear up landing, a common event that still happens quite frequently till this day. In the event a forgetful Mite pilot would leave the gear up before landing, a mechanical lever protruding from the cockpit would activate at lower power settings. Wagging back and forth, this device was impossible to ignore. As soon as the pilot released the Johnson bar and lowered the gear, the device would deactivate. It's said Al incorporated this feature after embarrassing himself with a gear up landing. Many of the Mites included a plexiglass window on the cockpit floor, letting pilots know the gear was properly retracted. In the event a pilot was unable to lock the Johnson bar in place, they were advised to conduct a belly landing. Mooney assured owners that with a thorough inspection, the very strong fuselage would likely be airworthy to fly again. And speaking of landing gears, here we see another stroke of genius by Al Mooney. In order to keep costs low and trouble-free, shock absorbers consisted of simple rubber donuts, which were shockingly easier to maintain versus typical landing gears. The short, stubby landing gear with rubber donuts can still be found on most Mooney models. The original Mooney tires came from a wheelbarrow, another cost-cutting measure. Furthering the concept of safety and simplicity, pilots didn't have to retrim the aircraft while deploying flaps. The flap and trim mechanisms were interconnected, thus lowering pilot workload during approaches. This was branded as the Safe Trim system and patented by Mooney. In offering a truly affordable plane, Al Mooney had to think outside the box when picking the costliest component of the aircraft, the engine. While automotive power plants are commonplace in the home-built world today, it was nearly unheard of in the late 40s. And furthering the risk, Mooney chose a highly unconventional engine, a Crosley Inline-4, one of the first engines with an overhead cam. In addition to being tiny, it was built out of sheet metal and therefore very light. With only 44 cubic inches, it produced 25 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, and thus required a belt drive to turn the propeller. The first 10 mites were delivered with Crosleys, however it was soon found out that they were very unreliable and had a tendency to crack their cases. As small as the Mooney Mites were, pilots also felt they were quite underpowered with the Crosley. Mooney ferried all 10 mites back to the factory and had them upgraded at no cost to Lycoming O-145s with 65 horsepower. This upgrade meant that the very light Mooney, originally designed for only 25 horsepower, was now powered by an engine with nearly 3 times the power. As a result, top speed increased from 100 miles per hour to 138, and rate of climb was about 1,000 feet per minute. The Mooney Mite truly became a pocket fighter, exactly as Al intended. At this stage of development, the little Mooney was nearly perfect. Pilots raved about how well balanced the Mite was, very responsive and yet docile at low speeds and landings. As small and cramped as the cockpit was, most pilots were having so much fun they'd forget about the size. True to the spirit of keeping the Mooney ultralight, they did not have an electrical system nor starter, so engine starts consisted of the pilots hand propping the Mite while standing in front of the wing. In an early article, one pilot raved about the Mite.
"When you fly this little thing, you don't feel like a pilot. You feel like a goddamn bird."
Mooney's rolled out of the factory costing only $2,000 and at the time were the cheapest production aircraft available. With only 65 horsepower, the nimble Mite could zip along at 125 miles per hour while sipping only 4 gallons of fuel. An incredible accomplishment in efficiency even for today. To help promote the Mite and celebrate his 25 years as an aircraft designer, Al decided to break a long-distance record for its category. Packing the plane with 45 gallons of fuel, Al Mooney flew the Mite from Texas to North Dakota, a total distance of 1,312 miles. And yet, after all this, Mooney was losing money on the Mite. Al's vision of mass production did not materialize, and the handcrafted wooden airframe was costly to build. Facing bankruptcy, they halted production, moved the factory to Caryville, Texas, where all remaining Mooney aircraft were built until the company went bankrupt. Lycoming stopped producing the O-145, so it was replaced with the 65 horsepower Continental A65, essentially the same engine that powered the Piper Cub. Performance, range, and cockpit size increased over time, and so did price. Eventually the Mite was costing $4,000, double what it initially sold at, and Mooney was bleeding money more than ever. The Mite was used as the foundation for the M20, a 4-place model that rolled out in the mid-50s. The M20 boasted the same efficiency and all the innovative features pioneered on the Mite, but packaged as a 4-seater with much improved payload and capabilities. The writing was on the wall for the Mite, and production was terminated in 1954. A total of 283 Mites were produced. All in all, not a bad number for an aircraft aimed at a very small niche in the market. Mites have now been around for over 70 years, and thus require a labor of love and lots of TLC to keep in pristine airworthy condition. Being fabricated from multiple materials, very thorough inspections are required to ensure the wood is not rotted, nor is any corrosion present on the metal. In 2000, one Mite owner experienced the unthinkable and the whole vertical tail snapped off. Through amazing skill and loads of luck, however, the pilot somehow managed to land the aircraft and live to tell the tale. Today, the Mite enjoys nearly cult status among pilots, and its owners still enjoy its excellent handling, low fuel consumption, and most importantly, the fun factor. Exactly as Al Mooney intended. Ferrari of the sky. The best damn airplane that ever flew. Pretty tall claims have been made about the Meyers 200 by its owner. What is it about this slender four-seater that seems to hit all the right spots? It's almost like some magic spell is cast upon those who get to know it. Is the Meyers 200 really what it's cracked up to be? The Meyers saga begins in 1908. Alan Meyers was born in New Jersey. Raised on a farm and living a simple life, he became obsessed with aviation during his teen years. Charles Lindbergh's Atlantic crossing in 1927 sealed Al's fate. At a young age, he joined the National Guard where he became a flight instructor. But Al was not content just flying airplanes, he wanted to build them too, and help shape aviation's future. Al worked under the wing of some of the best in the industry. While employed with Stinson, Vought, and Martin, Al soaked up all the knowledge he could and specialized in metalworks. With the help of a few designers from Stinson, Al crafted the Meyers OTW, which stood for Out to Win. Designed for barnstorming and training, the OTW was light and efficient, even on modest power. Al started working out of his garage, but soon a factory was set up in Tecumseh, Wisconsin, and over 100 OTWs were built. The OTW lived up to its name and was highly praised as simple, easy to fly, and especially safe. As the war ended, Al saw potential in a small traveling machine that was to be both economical and light on the pocket. From Al's drawing board, the Meyers 145 was born. Seating 2, it was powered by a Continental 0300. With only 145 horsepower, it could cruise at 140 knots. Putting his metal sculpting skills to good use, the 145 was built out of 4130 steel and aluminum skin. A winning recipe he would later put to good use on his next design. The 145 was a slick machine and praised by all. 17 units were built and sold. But Al was concerned the market was too small for a two-seater and couldn't help but notice how the Beechcraft Bonanza was dominating the four-seat segment in the 1950s. Conceived in the late 1940s, the Bonanza immediately took the world by storm and became synonymous with high performance and traveling. Al felt he could do better. The Meyers 145 was used as a foundation for his new four-seater, which he named the Meyers 200. 200 first flew with the 240 horsepower Continental, which was soon upgraded to 260 horsepower as standard equipment in production planes. Right off the bat, the 200 came swinging at its competitors with closed fists. With 260 horsepower, the 200 could cruise at an easy 155 knots. Over time, the 200 gained refinements and extra power. The D version had 285 horsepower and could now cruise at a blistering 180 knots, leaving Bonanzas and Comanches in its dust. In the first couple years of production, the 200 gobbled up speed records for its category. But power and speed alone were not what all 200 owners were lusting after. The plane is absolutely stunning to look at, with a slender teardrop fuselage that tapers to a classically shaped tail. Like the Bonanza, it sits tall and proud on its landing gear, earning a VIP status on any ramp it's parked at. Similar to the much slower Ryan Navion, the 200 sports a bubble canopy with wraparound windows, rewarding its passengers a nearly 360-degree panoramic view. Where other aircraft trade speed for cabin space, this was not the case with the 200, and both pilots and passengers could travel long distances and never feel cramped. The 200's relatively short wings ensure rock-solid handling at high altitudes, blasting through turbulence and making it an ideal IFR platform. The Meyers magic is also present in its construction method. The fuselage and part of the wing structure are built in 4130 steel as was the Meyers 145 that came before it. This steel bubble that surrounds the passengers not only ensures their safety, but allows for large wraparound windows. As to the safety aspect of the fuselage, there are many accounts where pilots have crash landed the 200 only to walk away unscathed. Even James Bond survives a fiery crash in the 007 classic You Only Live Twice. The FAA seems to love the 200, as it's quite possibly one of the only aircraft with no airworthy directives on the airframe. There has never been an in-flight structural failure with the 200, a record no other aircraft in its category can lay claim to. Unlike its competitors from Piper, Cessna, and Beechcraft, the Meyers 200 was hand-built with highly skilled workers and using very few jigs. This is where the Meyers 200 compares to Ferraris or other fine sports cars. During its brief production run under Al's ownership, only 10 to 15 Meyers 200 were produced per year. As a result of this slow and steady production method, the 200 commanded a premium over its competition. But this didn't seem to stop new orders from coming in. Al knew he was building a premium product that was being marketed to exclusive owners. Al Meyers was happily pumping out the 200s at a slow but steady pace, while pilots and owners helped build its legacy with rave reviews and positive flight reports. Meanwhile, North American Rockwell was steadily producing its own line of legendary twin-engine aircraft, the Aero Commander line. Rockwell felt they needed a single-engine model to add to its product family. The Meyers 200 fit the bill perfectly. It was fast, powerful, and comfortable. Al Meyers signed the dotted lines and turned the 200 over to Rockwell. Rebranded as the Aero Commander 200, Rockwell was excited to embark on this new chapter in their history. But things didn't go quite as planned. Rockwell's goal was to mass produce the 200 much in the same way as they had done with the Aero Commanders. What they didn't realize was that the 200s were hand-built. This meant they had to manufacture a brand new production line from scratch. This boondoggle cost Rockwell millions. After producing around 65 Aero Commander 200s at a loss, Rockwell shut down the production line and instead focused on building their own in-house model, the Rockwell 112. The 112 was vastly inferior in performance to Aero Commander 200, but much cheaper to produce. Rights to the Aero Commander 200 went to a small firm named Bizjets Inc., which might be a little hint for what the Meyers 200 had in store. By the 1970s, corporate jets and turboprops were all the rage, and Commander's new owners felt the design had so much more to offer. The Commander 200 was highly modified, morphing into a little hot rod called the Interceptor 400. The 400 was pressurized, with sleeker lines, and most notable of all, sported a 400 horsepower Garrett turboprop in place of the piston engine. Propjets struggled to market the 400, possibly because of the safety concerns over single-engine turboprop. Quite ironic, given that only 20 years later, Caravans, TBMs, and Pilatos would rule the skies. Only 2 were built, and nothing further has been heard about this aircraft. The Meyers 200 still maintains a cult status. In spite of its short production life and few numbers built, there are still about 65 200s on the registry. So, are they actually the best aircraft ever built? Well, as with anything in life, there are pros and cons, and owners need to decide for themselves what they need or desire. If RAM presence, 185 knot cruise speeds, comfort, and style are what suit your needs and taste, the Meyers 200 is the plane for you. On the other hand, if you need to stuff your plane with passengers and cargo, maybe a Cherokee 6 or even some of the Bonanzas will be a better fit. The Meyers, as would be expected of a nearly bespoke design, has its fair share of quirks which owners need to work around. Most single-engine aircraft have their engines mounted at an angle to help combat torque, which generally facilitates handling on takeoff. The 200 has no such angle built in. As a result, pilots report takeoffs that rival a P-51's in torque, and thus require a healthy dose of rudder to keep the plane straight. Insurance for a new pilot might be a bit difficult to come by, as the model is both rare and complex. Expect to pay anywhere between $150,000 to $180,000 for a well-kept example, and as with any antique model, find a mechanic who is well versed with the plane. So the Meyers might not be for everyone after all, which is probably just as good for its owners, who feel they've got a well-kept secret. For many of those owners, the Meyers 200 is still considered the fastest, strongest, most reliable, finest looking airplane ever built. Imagine this. You're driving a Ferrari, the engine roars as you glide down a scenic mountain road. I know, most of us can't afford a Ferrari, but let's just make believe. Now, imagine your Ferrari has wings. The Marchetti SF260 is widely considered the aerial equivalent to the Ferrari. It's fast, it turns perfect corners, and produces feelings of extreme joy when flown. And it looks just as stunning. Both fighter pilots and airshow pilots totally obsess over it. And even Tom Cruise owned it.
I feel the need for speed.
Which got wrecked, but we'll talk about that later. So, how did this slick Italian airplane manage to mesmerize so many pilots? And why does everyone compare it to the Ferrari? We know that Enzo Ferrari was known as the founding father of the Ferrari sports car. It turns out that the aviation world had its own version of Enzo Ferrari, and his name was Stelio Frati. Frati was kind of a freelance airplane designer and worked for different companies all over the years. This guy had a real knack for creating magnificent aircraft. It's almost like he was incapable of designing an ugly airplane. In 1955, Stelio Frati created a machine unlike anything the world has ever seen. In those days, most airplane companies were focused on low cost and mass production, but not Stelio Frati. His Falco F8 was a challenge to the status quo. The Falco was like an expensive designer cabinet, all made of wood and completely built by hand. This compact design was made for folks who want to zip around on minimal power, all while flying the sexiest airplane of the 1950s. The Falco blew everyone's minds and it delivered on exactly what it promised. With only 160 horsepower, it could cruise at a mind-blowing 200 miles per hour. The Falco is essentially the first sports plane of the skies. Sounds like the perfect airplane, right? Well, not quite. So there was a bit of a catch with the Falco. You had to build it yourself. You see, back in the 50s, you couldn't just go out and buy a ready-made kit. Nope. All you got were some blueprints, and you were on your own after that. People even joked that building a Falco was as easy as making one of those wooden balsa models, if you had like 8,000 hours to spare. In the end though, about 90 of these planes had been completed. So Frati had to really come up with something new and quick. It was back to the drawing board for him. And to make matters worse, Italy was up against some tough competition from American aircraft brands that were becoming quite popular at Italian airports. One aircraft that really stood out was the Beechcraft Bonanza, which had exceptional performance and pilots couldn't get enough of. Italy had nothing that could measure up against the Bonanza. So was Frati faced with all this? Nope. With his expertise in sexy and efficient designs, he knew he was the man who could one-up the Americans. After teaming up with Avia Milano for production, he unveiled his next masterpiece, the SF250. This design was loosely based on the Falco, but it had many improvements which would make it way more appealing to pilots everywhere, and way more simple to produce. For starters, power was swapped out for a 6-cylinder Lycoming packing 250 horsepower. Whereas the Falco required master carpentry skills, the SF250 was entirely built in metal, which lowered production costs and build time. It had a huge glass canopy under which sat 2 in the front, plus a bench seat for 1 adult or 2 kids in the back. The razor-thin wings were masterpieces in low-drag design. They were flush riveted. In other words, they were smooth like butter. This equals less drag and higher performance. And get this, even though it's clear the SF250 was directly inspired by the Falco, a lot of people claim that Frati borrowed heavily from the P-51 Mustang. And if you compare the wing profiles, you gotta agree they are somewhat similar. To give it some extra range, round fuel tanks were built into the wingtips, just like fighter jets from the 1950s. And once again, Frati knocked it out of the park. The SF250 wasn't just fast and comfy, it looked absolutely stunning. But the real icing on the cake? It could perform unlimited aerobatics. Yep, this was truly a fighter plane for the masses. A plane that made you feel like a Top Gun, but didn't require a lifetime of flying experience. Frati then decided to give the engine a little boost, cranking up to 260 horsepower and renamed it the SF260. Stelio Frati then hit the road, determined to sell his sports plane to wealthy individuals. And just like that, he hit a brick wall. His plane was way more expensive than anything else in the market, so he couldn't find one buyer willing to whip out their checkbook for his sporty design. So was this the end of the road for poor Frati and his beautiful Italian airplane? Not so fast. SF260 was given a second chance and was saved by a well-established aircraft company, SIAI Marchetti. You see, whereas Frati wanted to market the plane as a rich man's toy, Marchetti saw something completely different in the design. I mean, just look at it. It looks like a miniature fighter plane, doesn't it? So why not sell it as a military training aircraft? Test pilots discovered it flew almost like a jet, making it a breeze for student pilots to step up to more advanced fighters. It was well built and rugged, meaning it could take the abuse of a newbie pilot day after day and still keep on flying. The long nose gear kept the prop away from rocks and debris, meaning it could fly out a dirt runway, and it totally rocked the fighter plane looks, with its round canopy and fighter plane control sticks. In no time, they made some improvements to the SF260 and boom, it started selling like crazy all over the world. It soon found its way to more than 25 countries. It flew like a champ under the most demanding conditions from all corners of the planet. Marchetti didn't stop there. The SF260 soon evolved into a ground attack plane. This bad boy had hardpoints under the wings that could carry up to 600 pounds, whether slinging machine gun pods or rocket. In the early 1980s, Marchetti cranked it up a notch and sold a turboprop version, this time with 350 horsepower under the hood. This model could perform 30% better in speed and climb while sacrificing a little range. Not bad for a plane that started out as a flying sports car. Before you knew it, civilian pilots were drooling over the SF260. This badass plane was quickly becoming a legend among students and instructors. But there was a catch. You couldn't buy them directly from Marchetti, so poor private pilots were left high and dry. Enter Alex Berger. In the 1970s, Berger bought out the Franklin Engine Company. Sadly, Berger couldn't find anyone interested in his engines, so he came up with a brilliant plan. How about we import aircraft from Italy and swap them out with Franklin's? Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Berger rebranded the company as Waco. Yep, I'm talking about that same Waco known for their legendary biplanes from the 1930s. Rebranded as the Waco Meteor, a total of 4 SF260s were imported as kits and then reassembled in the US. These planes marked the first time that regular folks could actually own a Frati design. Soon, the plane was hogging magazine covers and pilot reports, many of them claiming the Meteor as the best aircraft money could buy. Sadly, Waco went bankrupt and the Meteors were no longer. Fast forward another 10 years, and the SF260 eventually found its way back into the US. This time around, air forces around the world were starting to retire the plane, so now you could own one as war surplus. Also during this time, several groups used the SF260 for formation flying at air shows. And now, the general public had their first glimpse at the Italian wonder designed by Stelio Frati. As new owners got their hands on it, they couldn't help but compare it to the Ferrari, which not only helped spread its mystique, but certainly helped bump up the price. When the last ones rolled off the production line, the price tag was a cool $1 million. If you want to use SF260 today, you're looking at shelling out between $250,000 to $350,000. Kinda hard to justify, right? Well, that is until you get a chance to know the plane up close and personal. When it comes to handling, the word on the street is that it's the cream of the crop, with no bad habits or annoying quirks. A P-51 pilot even swore that flying this thing is as close as you'll ever get to a fighter plane, even if you've never stepped foot in one. Its precise ailerons let you roll at a nimble 90 degrees per second, and even when it's fully stalled, you still have full control of the airplane. Many compare it to the Beech T-34 Mentor, but those same pilots claim it can fly faster and performs with much better precision. Rolls, snap rolls, loops, hammerheads, they're all walk in the park for this plane. But the SF-260 is not just a showpiece for aerobatics. The aircraft's performance envelope is wide. You can push it up to 200 miles per hour and get places quick. Or, if you need maximum range, you can dial it back to 165 miles per hour. While it might not be breaking any records for short takeoffs, it's perfectly at home on dirt strips. After takeoff, it will blast off at 1,700 feet per minute. Pretty wild, huh? In terms of creature comforts, it's got room for 3 adults. But many owners like to use that back seat for extra space, where you can haul up to 250 pounds of luggage with ease. When flown with a light foot on the gas, it will carry you about 900 miles on a full tank. With a higher wing loading than a Bonanza, pilots and passengers enjoy a silky smooth ride, even in choppy air. When it comes to owners, it's easy to see why they love the plane. It's very well built and simple to maintain. All systems and components are within easy reach. And the Lycoming 0540 is considered by many the gold standard in reliability. That's definitely a claim that Ferrari can't make. Even though most SF-260s are all about the acrobatics and stunts, many owners are perfectly happy using it as a sporty traveling machine. Take this owner over in Germany for example. He zips all over Europe, averaging around 200 miles per hour in cruise. He claims that the plane is so rock solid that once he gets it trimmed out, he can fly it hands-free. And get this, he doesn't even have an autopilot. Once the SF-260 started becoming more readily available, it attracted both aerobatic pilots and celebrities. Debbie Gary boasts over 50 years of flying experience and didn't miss a beat before taking it to air shows. Having flown a wide range of planes in the air show circuit, picking the SF-260 was a no-brainer. Here's a fun bit of movie trivia. Guess which plane was used to shoot down James Bond? In the 2008 007 flick Quantum of Solace, an SF-260 turboprop tries to shoot down Bond's DC-3, but no one outguns James Bond, of course. So he outsmarts the enemy pilot and lives to see another day. And get this, the SF-260 even hit primetime TV. On the BBC show Top Gear, it got to compete in a real-life game of laser tag with cars. Their mission was to take down supercars as they zoomed around a racetrack, doing their best to evade the pilots. Those pilots confirmed several kills on that show.
Lex is dead. Aston is dead. Bingo, Viper's dead.
Ever heard of Tom Cruise? The guy who made F-14s famous in the original Top Gun movie? Well, it turns out he also had a serious crush on the SF-260. Yep, he briefly owned one back in the 90s. Sadly for him, his plane got wrecked during a ferry flight.
Son of a bitch!
Don't worry about Tom though. He eventually got over it, after he bought a P-51. A few aerobatics teams from around the world picked the SF-260 as their ride of choice. The Alpe Eagles were Italy's first civilian aerobatic team. Over in Belgium, they were flown as the Red Devils, which dazzled audiences all across Europe. In 46 years of production, Marchetti cranked out about 900 units, and of those, roughly 100 are still going strong. SF-260 has not just survived, but thrived, creating a sort of a cult following among aviation fans and pilots alike. For those who've had the privilege to fly one, it's the best handling aircraft they've ever flown. As to those who own one, it's possibly the last aircraft they will ever own. And that's where the Ferrari and SF-260 comparison come full circle. Both represent far more than just an aircraft or car. They embody a design ethos where form and function coexist in beautiful harmony. Where it's not just about getting from point A to point B, it's about the journey, the experience, the thrill. And that's what makes both these Italian machines truly bellissimo.
Ever heard of the Airtruk? I bet you've never seen a plane shaped this way before, or ever will again. Why was this aircraft designed this way? Let's take a step back in Australian aviation history to learn what shaped this odd-looking design. First, I will introduce you to an eccentric Italian designer named Luigi Pellegrini. Pellegrini first attempted to light the world on fire with a flying car design while living in Italy at the end of World War II. Unfortunately, that design flopped. Pellegrini packed his bags and ideas and moved to Australia, seeking aviation riches. At the time, the land down under was investing heavily in developing their own aircraft and not being so reliant on costly equipment imported from the United States. His first design was the Kingford Smith PL-7. It was a perfect reflection on Pellegrini's eccentric style. The PL-7 laid the foundation for future designs that bore the Pellegrini name, especially the twin booms with detached T-tails and pod-like fuselage. Powered with an inexpensive and readily available Armstrong Siddeley Cheetah with 7 cylinders and 400 horsepower, the PL-7's cockpit was positioned at the very end of a fuselage pod, offering less than desirable visibility for the pilot. Sadly, before the PL-7 could ever gain certification, it was lost in a fire. Once again, Pellegrini was jobless. At this time, New Zealand was seeking to develop a homegrown top-dresser aircraft as it could no longer rely on aging British relics from World War II. Pellegrini was hired by New Zealand manufacturer Waitomo and rolled back his sleeves. Once again, Pellegrini's genius shone through on the PL-11 Airtruk. Combining a similar layout as the PL-7 and using cannibalized T6 Texan parts, the Bennett Airtruk was a design unlike any seen before. The cockpit was now placed squarely on top of the engine, rewarding the pilot with a true crow's nest view rarely seen on any other plane in this category. Like the PL-7, the Airtruk lingered for many years until finally granted certification, but both prototypes were lost in crashes, and the project was never carried forward. Pellegrini was jobless again. Fortunately, Transavia from Australia picked up the project, brought Pellegrini back to Australia, who redesigned the Airtruk into the much smaller airframe, the PL-12. Renamed the Airtruk without a C, it was roughly half the size and half the empty weight compared to the original Airtruk, but twice as practical and far more economical to operate. In juxtaposition to the original Radial lifted from the Texan, the new Airtruk was now powered with a flat 6. It was quickly becoming the global standard in general aviation and was very easy to maintain and operate. At the time, Transavia was one of the first companies whose sole offering was a crop duster, whereas competitors Cessna, Piper, and Grumman had a wide portfolio of other aircraft. The Airtruk was bizarre and unconventional in more ways than meets the eye. For starters, the aircraft has no tail section to speak of. Pod-like designs are not new or obscure, the most obvious example being the P-38 with its teardrop-shaped fuselage and twin-boom tail. Unlike other similar designs that use this layout, however, the Airtruk has twin T-tails on each boom, meaning there's no stabilizer behind the fuselage. As a result, the Airtruk looks ridiculously short-coupled when viewed from the side. This odd arrangement allowed space for a loading truck to be backed between the tails where it could fill the hopper while the engine was running, keeping turnaround time to a minimum. The moment the hopper was filled, the pilot would throttle up and blast off without waiting for the loading truck to move away. After all, crop dusters don't make money when they're on the ground. Built for simplicity and ease of maintenance, the twin booms were interchangeable, as were the aileron flaps, shock absorbers, wheel assemblies, and tailplanes. The wide placement of the tails also kept them out of the range of the chemicals when dispersed, which resulted in a longer life on the field and less corrosion. In most conventional single-engine designs, the pilot is seated inside the fuselage and behind the engine and firewall. Not so with the Airtruk, where pilots will find themselves sitting on top of the engine. It's a rather unsettling thought, especially knowing your feet could go up in flames if a cylinder blows. This arrangement, in fact, kept the pilots above the hopper and engine, which could otherwise crush them in a crash. This also provided pilots with a very high vantage point and better visibility with no engine in the pilot's field of view. On the flip side, the view to the side was restricted by the shoulder-mounted wings. A 220-pound chemical hopper was located in a cavernous space behind and below the pilot. In the event a pilot needed to clear an obstacle, the hopper could be jettisoned with the flip of a switch. Unlike other crop dusters, the Airtruk could accommodate a wide variety of cargo in place of the hopper, including human cargo. While an additional passenger could be squeezed behind the pilot, In the lower compartment, a bench seat could fit two facing backwards, as they enjoyed a greenhouse view of the twin T-tails. It was reportedly very cramped and very noisy in the rear quarters, and when flaps were deployed, the only exit was blocked. A miserable ride indeed. Another uncanny feature were the stubby wheels mounted to equally stubby wings. The short tricycle gear was chosen to help absorb the most shock on rough airfields and make crosswind operations much safer. Technically, the Airtruk was known as a sesquiplane, as the lower wings provided about 20% of the total lift. The wings have the same airfoil as the Helio Courier, yielding excellent short-field capability. When lightly loaded, it could take off in 250 feet. Air fences on the upper wing were employed to keep maximum aileron control at low speeds, improving safety. The choice of a sesquiplane layout was no accident either. The wing vortices created by the stubby lower wing helped to disperse chemicals over a wide field and with good accuracy. Power was provided by either a Continental IO520 or a Lycoming IO540, which was known as the Sky Farmer. Even with this modest arrangement, the Airtruk is one of the only few aircraft that can carry a load greater than its own weight. A fire-breathing muscle car version was offered with a monstrous Lycoming IO720 with 8 cylinders and 400 horsepower, which certainly should have helped in lifting heavier loads, but with the massive amounts of drag likely did not go any faster than the original. As if the IO720 wasn't enough, there was a proposed version carrying a Pratt & Whitney PT6 turboprop, but this version never left the drawing board. Seeing opportunities beyond spraying cornfields, Transavia offered the PL-12 in other flavors in hopes to gain interest from other governments. The PL-12 Bushranger was an Airtruk dressed in Army fatigues. This version could squeeze in 5 passengers and carry them to remote locations with its STOL capabilities, or even hang some light armor such as rockets on its stubby lower wings. Another version, named the PL-12 MIL Air Ambulance version, was also proposed, which had room for 2 stretchers plus 2 attendants. Though prototypes were built, neither version moved forward. Regardless of all of its idiosyncrasies, the Airtruk appears to fly perfectly well, and did its job without complaining. Pilots reported it as very slow and very sluggish in climb, but with good control responsiveness, a direct result of having twin-tail surfaces. In 1969, a lone Airtruk was showcased to the world by flying one from Australia to South Africa via Asia and stopping at many countries in between. It's unknown how many were sold after the voyage of that brave Airtruk, but it did wind up staying in South Africa, where a few more units were sold. The Airtruk was featured in the 1985 film Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome, an adventure flick that took place in Australia. While movie critics lauded Mel Gibson and Tina Turner's memorable performances, the real star of the movie was the Airtruk, a delightfully Australian aircraft to match an equally Australian movie. Even after all the glitz and Hollywood hype, the Airtruk never sold in large numbers, and only 117 units were built. Even though it is arguably better in many aspects in comparison to similar powered models, it was also priced higher. Even when accounting for import taxes for models built overseas, it received scant attention or support from the Australian government, something Transavia was fighting for in order to help subsidize production and hopefully lower unit costs. It also didn't help that Transavia was Australian, as Australians themselves had the mindset that their homegrown products were inferior to those built abroad. Though many of the Airtruks operated in Australia and New Zealand, they were sold in Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, East Africa, South Africa, Kenya, Thailand, Yugoslavia, Spain, and North America. Of all the Airtruks built, only a small handful remain, a testament to the fact that these were rugged little airplanes that fit their mission perfectly and were therefore used and abused to the very end. As is common with crop dusters, many were lost in crashes while sparing their pilots, exactly as they were designed to do. As far as its looks go, it's been said that the Airtruk was once a normal-looking aircraft that crashed, then was put back together by a blind person. But Luigi Pellegrini knew exactly what he was doing, and the world is a better place thanks to him and the Airtruk.
Well, looks like you made it to the finish line, and if you did, congratulations, you are a true av geek, just like me. And if you're truly an av geek, then you will certainly enjoy this next video. Thank you, and see you next time.